All right, I'm going to make another video. Please like, subscribe, comment. I want to put that at the beginning because I think that people may not do that. I'm going to go into a little bit of a explanation of glam, some glam information, some information about glam metal and why I call it that. And then I'm going to go into showing the albums and playing clips. So please like and subscribe and comment below. Okay, do another video. This is going to be my second video in this little series I'm doing of post-2000s glam metal. And I'm going to kind of do this I think I'm going to use this as a response video as well for JC from the Flip Side. He's put out a video where he recommended a bunch of hair metal bands for a friend, and he asked the vinyl community to post some videos about some glam metal bands or hair metal bands that they would recommend as a starting. Now, I think since I'm already doing this series of these 3 videos that I'm going to do with some of the records that I have, which are basically post 2000s glam metal bands, it kind of skipped a generation. Basically, it skipped the 90s pretty much entirely, and we're kind of into the 2000s. But there's a lot of bands that discovered the music that weren't there when it was, when it actually happened. And there's been kind of this like resurgence, not necessarily in America. There's been some American bands that have, either kept going from from the 80s, like LA Guns I showed in the first video, but there's also some bands, that just are starting out, just creating this type of music. I really think that glam rock in the 70s and glam metal of the 80s really fused kind of like the melodicism of pop music, and really and put a heavy metal spin on it. Like there's albums like 7800 Fahrenheit, from Bon Jovi, where there's a lot of keyboards in that album. There's a lot of pop on that album, and it really goes up to a line where, if they pushed it a bit further, it kind of tuned down the guitars even more and added more electronic elements, a lot of those songs could just be pure pop songs. I really think that they could be kind of converted in a way. So I think that some bands like that kind of pushed up to the line. And I think that that's what glam metal did. It kind of sat in this, in between of, pop music and, heavy metal music, but it kind of fused it. And I think that's where kind of glam metal from the 70s came from. It's a lot of bands who maybe listened to the Beatles, who really, really liked the melodies. Maybe they listened to a lot of 60s, pop music, but they were also listening to a lot of hard rock like Led Zeppelin and, just hearing heavier music in the 70s. And they kind of just fused it together to kind of make glam rock at the time. I'm thinking like T-Rex's, Slade, those kind of guys, because the melody in those bands, wasn't really found in, like the Led Zeppelins, the Black Sabbaths, and things like that. But anyway, that's just to go on a little bit of a, tangent, I guess. So, yeah, so I think that glam metal, and that's why I'm going to keep calling it glam metal, because I really think that these bands were inspired by the glam rock scene from the 70s. And I think it's an evolution of that genre but bringing metal elements into it, more heavier style. So I'm going to show some more bands that came out in the actually, this is more, the first album I'm going to show came out in 2016. So now we're getting closer to, we're in the 2010s now, in the middle of the 2010s. So it's been, the first video kind of covered about 10 years. I think it was up to 2015 of just albums that I have. Of course, there's tons of other bands that are out there, but I can't afford to buy everything. But I do like this new kind of generation of bands. And I'm going to show a lot of the same bands that I showed in the last video, and there's a few new ones in here. So Bandmate, I think, is still one of the bands that is pushing the, glam metal style. Now, the glam part of this, if you want to say that the glam part is the style, the fashion, or maybe even makeup or whatever. I think that these guys have a gimmick. They're dressed in maid outfits, but they are playing hard rock music, and very, very melodic hard rock music. So I think that's kind of like one of the prerequisites for this, is that if you want to be considered a glam metal band or a hair metal band or whatever, you know, whichever term you want to use, or, you know, melodic hard rock band, you got to have those melodies. You got to have the pop sensibility. And I think I didn't mention this in the first video when I brought up Bandmate, but because Bandmate are from Japan, the pop music that they're infusing into their heavy metal music, you know, their hard rock heavy metal music, is J-pop. So that's why it sounds different. It doesn't sound like, you know, like a Babylon AD or something like that, like how a Crazy Licks sounds, you know, where they're emulating bands like Babylon AD, Danger Danger, you know, they're pulling from that kind of thing. But I really think that these guys are kind of emulating more of the J-pop sound, and they're putting that, infusing that into their heavy rock or heavy metal sound that they have. And these guys just, honestly, they just keep getting heavier and heavier. I'm going to show another album later on, and they just keep getting heavier and heavier. And these were all reissued, pretty much the entire Bandmate discography. But there's, I believe, 5 albums that were released all on the same day in November of 2021. So these are still available. They're about $50 each. They're expensive, but it's because, you know, they're imports from Japan, but they are high quality vinyl and high quality packaging. You know, these are really thick card outer sleeves, you know, very thick, and everything's, they're all gatefolds with lyrics. And I use my Google Translate app to kind of translate the lyrics, you know, as I'm looking at the album sometimes. Even though they're not singing in that language, I still, in English, I can at least, you know what words they're saying. To an extent, you know, I mean, it translates, so it's not always 100%. But anyway, Bandmate are great. I recommend these guys, and I'm going to play some clips. And this time, though, I think I'm going to play like a chorus, you know, just so you can hear the melody and the melodicism. But then I'm going to play some, like a guitar solo. I think I picked a guitar solo from almost every record, just to show you, like, the musicianship for these, you know, these bands. You know, that's one thing that the glam metal scene had in the 80s. You know, a lot of those guys, you know, watched Eddie Van Halen come up in the 70s, in the mid 70s up to 78 for their first album. You know, they were going to those shows as teenagers, you know, seeing Van Halen, and then they picked up guitars, seeing Eddie, you know, playing early, and just were like, I want to play like that. And then you could see there was a ton of, like, you know, guitar virtuoso stuff. But anyway, I'm going to show off a little bit of the guitar virtuosity of some of these bands. Just, you know, I'm not an instrumentalist, you know, I don't play guitar, so I don't know how hard it is to play these solos and stuff, but they sound awesome. Some of them sound directly out of, you know, Van Halen, so you can really hear that they're really emulating that sound. All right, the next album, this is another Pretty Reckless record. This is Who You Sellin' For. Now, this album is a bit different. This would be a subgenre, I think, of glam. The Pretty Reckless kind of started out, you know, just really like as a hard rock band, maybe even emulating a little, kind of mixing hard rock and grunge more. But I still think that they also pull from the glam stuff, you know, I really do. But on this album, not so much. This album, they really pull from, they kind of do what a Cinderella did on Heartbreak Station. You know, they went really bluesy. They kind of moved really far away from Night Songs. You know, if you listen to Night Songs and then you listen to Heartbreak Station, it's almost like two different bands, really, because of how different the music is. You know, you can kind of hear an evolution there, but it's pretty drastic if you go from one to the other. And I think the same thing kind of holds true for this album, where, You know, this is their third album. So the first two albums were very similar, hard rock, you know, real strong hitting hard rock music with melodicism. This is definitely more blues based, and there's a lot more ballads on here. This is kind of more inspired by just 70s hard rock. So this album is probably, it doesn't quite fit into the post 2000s glam metal that I'm kind of going with here, but I still think this is a worthy album. And I think in the same way that Cinderella kind of changed their style, I think Pretty Reckless kind of did the same thing. And then on the new album, Death by Rock and Roll, you know, they kind of go back a bit, you know, and pull away from this. This is a really good album. I think it's just not as hard hitting, you know, as heavy. And the song I'll play is probably one of the heaviest songs on there, and you'll tell that it's not as heavy as some of the stuff, you know, or hard rocking as some of the other stuff that is on the other three albums that they have. Now this is another Band-Maid record. Not going to talk again too much. I'll play just a little clip, but this is their first. This album's on two vinyl release. There's two records in here, and there's like 3 songs on each side. So their compositions are getting a bit more complicated, and I think they're getting more involved in the writing, because these guitar players, I mean, these girls on this band, they are so good. And in Japan, they have the idol system where, you know, they get a lot of writers on the beginning, and the record labels really don't trust the band at this point to kind of write their own material and trust that they're going to get hits. But on the next album I'm going to show, they pretty much wrote almost the whole thing, which is pretty amazing. And it's really, really, really good. So I think that as they're making these records, they're really learning, you know, because they're pretty young anyway, so they're really learning the type of songs they want to play. Not only the type of songs they want to play, but the type of songs they want to write. So, you know, and in interviews they said, you know, they always submitted stuff, you know, but it was getting rejected, or maybe it was incorporated a little bit. But, you know, I really think on the next album they really come into their own. But this is a pretty good album too. And I'll play a little. This is Just Bring It, and I'll play a little bit from this one. All right, the next one, this is Steel Panther. This is Lower the Bar. I am missing their third album. I think it's All You Can Eat or whatever it was called. This is on green vinyl. But again, this is pure, like, hair. You know, like, you could call this hair metal, and I don't think anybody would be offended if you called Steel Panther hair metal, because they are taking all of the, I wouldn't say the worst parts of the genre, but the, you know, the most cheesy parts of, you know, the 80s glam metal bands, you know, where, you know, like they're all wearing wigs, you know, the bass player Lexi Fox is just wearing a ton of makeup, you know, and he's really interested in his looks. You know, they're just really parodying the genre, you know, they're just making fun of the worst parts of the hair metal scene from the 1980s, and they're just kind of taking it to 11, you know. But anyway, and the style of music, like I said about these guys before, the music is great. I think the guys are fantastic. I don't think that they really have a bad bone in their body about, you know, the music and things like that. So I don't think they're making fun of it because they just don't like it. I don't think they could have done it for this long. Anyway, this is Lower the Bar. play a little bit from this. All right, here's another release from Crazy Licks. This is Rough Justice. This is 2017. So all those albums, well, the last two I showed were 2017. Two before that were 2016. So we're still in 2017. So these 2016, 2017 were pretty big years, at least from the collection that I have. And this is Rough Justice. I'll play a little bit from this. Don't have to say too much about these guys. Now, like I said, these guys are pulling from like what I would call like the Babylon AD, kind of like the B bands of the 80s glam scene, you know, really homogenous sound, but the choruses, you know, the melodicism is great. And because it's fresh again, you know, because it's in the 2000s, it just feels fresh, you know, because there's no, you know, if you've heard all the stuff from the 80s or a lot of it, you know, that sounds like this, it's kind of cool to hear new music that sounds like that. You know, it's just fun. So Crazy Licks, Rough Justice. Here's the album that I was talking about from Bandmade that they wrote pretty much all the material on this. This is a very, very heavy album, and you'll hear the section that I'll play. There's a couple songs I would love to just play for full, you know, in full for these guys. If you pick up any of the Bandmade records at all, pick up this one. This one is a 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, 100%, whole deal. It's very, very heavy, very great musicianship on here, and the lyrics just jump out. But like I said, they're taking their cues from more from the J-pop side of the melodicism than of, you know, maybe American pop. So yeah, just know that. But I still think it's glam metal, even though it's a different culture. They're kind of emulating the same thing that the American bands did, where, you know, they're pulling from the pop music. You know, that's why it's, you know, sometimes people call it pop metal, you know, because really the melodicism is just so strong sometimes, especially like in a Bon Jovi or a Danger or something like that, where the melodicism is just really, really strong, that some of those songs, you know, you take out the guitars, you throw in a little bit of, you know, pop, you know, maybe 80s synthesizers and things like that, just swap out some instruments and you could really switch those songs over really quick. Similar here, where, you know, because these guys, I think, listen to J-pop, grew up with it, you know, it's in their brain wiggling around, you know, inspiring them, even if they're not aware of it, even though they're trying to write really heavy songs. That melodicism and that J-pop stuff just kind of comes out, you know, in a lot of the songs. But fantastic album. This is the one I would recommend if you were to buy any of the Bandmade stuff. This is the one. here's a band that has a real cool history, a real interesting history, where in the 80s they were pure, especially on their, I guess second full-length album. They were fully teased makeup, like they were really, and they started, early on in the glam metal scene, but now they've gotten pretty heavy, and they still sound great. And like the melodicism is still there, but the guitars and the riffs that they're coming up with, these guys are really going more towards the Judas Priest, or even the just the heavy metal in general. But the melodicism is still there, and that's Striper. This is Goddamn Evil. And this album, man, it's incredibly melodic, but these guitar, riffs that they're coming up, I mean, they're really like heavy metal riffs. And the guitar tone is very crunchy, very almost thrash metal, like you could, if you sped up some of these songs and sped up those riffs, they could easily be turned into thrash metal riffs, but they keep it at a mid pace, and they add the melody in there, for the choruses and stuff like that. So they're still doing, I think, glam metal, but this is more metal than glam, I guess I would say. And these guys have had like a second career, like they had their first half of their career where, they were definitely in the 80s. And this is one of those bands like an LA Guns, still going strong. I mean, Michael Sweet's voice is definitely not as strong as it used to be, but in the studio, with whatever they can do in there, maybe there's auto-tuning or whatever, helping him out, maybe more harmonies and stuff like that. He can really still nail it in the studio, and I think that's really good. Even if live, I think he struggles a little bit live nowadays. But, age is going to do that no matter what, so that's just the unfortunate part of being a singer going into your 50s, and 60s and stuff, so they're just all going to struggle with their voice. You could probably still play an instrument, drums, guitar, bass, and stuff like that without really losing much, if you, continue to train and play. But singing is just something natural that's going to happen. It's just going to go away. I don't think it's gone away, but I do think that Michael Sweet definitely struggles a little bit more live than he used to. But anyway, that's not to take anything away from him, and he still can punch out some of these songs live. It's just he's not doing those really highs that he used to be able to do, and maintaining some of those long, yells and stuff like that. But on album, it still sounds great. There's a clip from this album. Now, this is Now, this is a band that this album came out in 2018. This is kind of one of those bands where, the traditional heavy metal is strong on this album, but the melodicism and the comparison to Dokken is so strong with this band that you have to put them in glam metal, and that's hitting. If you like Dokken, any like from Tooth and Nail, Under Lock and Key, Back for the Attack, these guys are your 2000s band. And once you hear the clip I play, now these songs are good. They're not great, they're not maybe as good as Dokken, but they are right there, man. They just need to write a little bit better songs, and they will be, not equaling Dokken maybe, but they will be, a really good, I don't want to say imitation, but a really good, I don't know what to say to not offend them, but they sound a lot like fucking Dokken is what I'm saying. So this album is just really good. You'll hear from the clip how much Dokken is in here, especially with his voice. You know, he's really, well, the way he sings is, it's almost like his voice can naturally do it, but he maybe pushes it a little bit to sound even more like Don Dokken. Anyway, this is a good album. I picked this up. They have a brand new album that's out that I'm eventually going to get. I just need to pull the trigger on it. Here's a Canadian band that came out in 2018. This is Striker. This is Play to Win. This is a pretty good record. There's a lot of melody on, especially with the song the little clip I'll play. And yeah, these guys are pretty good. I would pick this album up if you can find it. I have like the special edition with it has a foil cover and it's colored vinyl, but I think you can still get this album pretty cheap. You know, the regular version. You might even be able to find this version for pretty cheap. And this is pretty good. Really good melodic metal from Canada. Also kind of has that, you know, traditional heavy metal, but there's just too much melodicism in here to just throw them into trad metal, you know, all on its own. There's just too much. The guitars, like there's a lot of melody in the guitar, you know, the notes that they do leading into choruses, coming out of choruses, you know, things like that. So there's just a lot of melodicism on here that you just can't ignore the glam influence, especially the 80s glam influence on these guys. And here's a clip. All right, here's the last one. This one I just got too. It was just released. You could still get this album too if you go to the Frontiers website. This is Crazy Licks, Forever Wild. You can also get the very first album I showed, Loud Minority. They still have that available on the, I believe, the US Frontiers site. Pick those up right now, man, because those are great records. You'll have fun with them. You know, these guys are just really, really good, solid, you know, glam metal that's in the 2000s. You know, like they're really emulating and influenced by that genre so much that the songwriting is just really, really good. And I'll play a clip, you know, of these guys as well. So that's pretty much all I have for this video. You know, I think I could go on about why I think it should be called glam metal, but I really think that hair metal obviously wasn't a real term until afterwards, you know, when people kind of made fun of the genre and wanted to call it, you know, hair metal. Now, I think that that has kind of become in the kind of the nomenclature of how people talk about that style of music. Maybe it's not derogatory anymore. You know, people have maybe it's more of a, you know, a loving kind of nickname for the genre, you know, for some people. But I still think it's one of those terms that kind of can go either way. You know, when somebody says, oh, that sounds like hair metal, that could mean bad. Or somebody could say, oh, that's hair metal, that sounds, you know, that's something good. You know, so I think that term can go either way. It, you know, really depends on the context, the person who's speaking about it. But I think glam metal, with the, you know, the origins of the original bands that started the glam metal scene being influenced by 70s glam rock, I think that there's just too much of a direct correlation that just calling it hard rock, just calling it heavy metal, it's not enough. I mean, that's the umbrella that it's under, but the subgenre that a lot of these bands belong in, I think, is glam metal. And I'm going to keep calling my videos glam metal. I'm going to keep trying to push that. You know, I really think that that's a better term, because glam rock, I don't hear anybody complaining when somebody says T-Rex is glam rock, and nobody's going, fuck no, that's not right. You know, or Bowie, you know, is glam rock, you know, in the 70s, his 70s, Ziggy Stardust, that's glam rock. Nobody's like bitching about people, you know, calling it glam rock. And I really think that the glam metal bands is an evolution. It's an evolution of, you know, these guys hearing Judas Priest, but also loving the, you know, loving T-Rex and Slade, you know, so they kind of mixed Judas Priest and Slade and, you know, made it heavy metal. So I think that that's what happened here. That's just my opinion. There is a wiki page that 100% agrees with me, and I actually read that after, you know, because I had these opinions about this. I named my section glam metal a long time ago, like a couple of years ago. I decided that I wasn't going to call it hair metal, and I actually even clarify even more that it's 80s glam metal. You know, almost 99% of the bands in there, in that section, my 3 or 4 cubbies that I have of this genre of music, are from the 80s, you know, starting with like Hanoi Rocks, you know, like that's kind of like the beginning of it, you know, where they really just took New York Dolls and emulated it in 1980, you know. So, you know, they just loved New York Dolls, and they were like, we want to play music like New York Dolls. Where is the New York Dolls of 1980? They became that to the fucking T, actually, you know, like they are exactly like that. And then, of course, you know, Slash and Axl heard all that, and they just loved it. They you know, they were emulated by that, and of course they were already listening to T-Rex, you know. So that I just think it's just too natural of a evolution. Anyway, I'm gonna end the video. It's almost 27 minutes plus clips. So the clips are going to make the video even longer. I hope you stick it through and watch it. Like and subscribe, comment, all that stuff. And thanks. Bye.